Welcome back to the 83rd online episode of Peacetime, hosted every Sunday morning by Peace Point with myself, Phra Nicholas Thanissaro, coming to you from DIMC in Azusa, California. Over the previous couple of sessions, we have looked at the Siglavada Sutta. Today, with the Dhamma talk, we're going to move on to look at the Sāmaññaphala Sutta. And I estimate today's session will run to about an hour and 10 minutes with a 20-minute break halfway through for some meditation. The sutta we'll be studying in today's session comes from the second of the lengthy discourses of the Buddha, or the Digha Nikaya. More specifically, it comes from the first volume of the Digha Nikaya, known as the Sila Gandawaka. It is thus referenced in Western scholarship as D147 or DN2. Today, the translation manuscript I'll make use of is Maurice Walsh's Wisdom Publications edition version of the Long Discourses of the Buddha, and I will mention in passing that Walsh's translation, The Homeless Life, would be confused with vagrants or unhoused people in the modern-day parlance. The commentary I'll draw upon is from the Venerable Tatachiwa's 1997 book, Phra, which I had a hand in translating as Book 4 of the Dhammakaya Foundation's Buddhism in Plain English series, Fruits of True Monkhood, which was published in 2003. So if we break down the name of the Sāmaññaphala Sutta, the prefix Sāmañña is derived from Samana, which means an ordained person or a monk. And the prefix Phala means the fruit or the outcome. So it's basically about the point or the purpose of becoming a monk. And as I mentioned with the previous discourses which we already looked at, to understand why such a teaching was given, then we must understand something about the context. So as usual, we will go through the sequence of sources, sutta name, place names, interlocutors, backstory, and overview before looking at the manuscript itself, the outcome of the teaching, and some of the issues the sutta raises. So once again, consulting our Pali Book of Proper Names, we find that Ambawana Temple, where the sutta was given, literally means the mango grove. It was situated just outside Rajagaha or Rajgir, and was donated to the monastic community by a supporter called Jivaka Komarapacha. We will meet again in just a moment. Rajagaha was the capital of the Magadha kingdom, where King Ajatasattu had his palace. And in this particular discourse, there are several interlocutors playing a role in this teaching. The first, of course, was the Buddha himself, referred to in the translation as the Lord or the Blessed Lord. The second interlocutor was a king called Bimbisara, who was a just and kindly ruler, but was imprisoned and eventually died because of the actions of his own son. So by the time the sutta was given, King Bimbisara had already passed away. King Bimbisara's queen was called Videha, but was also known as Kosala Devi. This particular sutta mostly concerns the son of this king and queen, who was called Prince Ajatasattu, later King Ajatasattu. Then we come to Jivaka Komarapacha, who was King Ajatasattu's royal physician. Of course, we also have 6 heretical teachers mentioned who were religious rivals contemporary to the Buddha, and who I'll return to in just a moment. That leaves us with the Venerable Devadatta, who was the cousin of the Buddha himself, and who from an early age had shown himself to be of questionable character. Some of you may be familiar with the traditional account of Devadatta shooting a swan with an arrow when he was still a boy, and then having an argument with Prince Siddhartha about who owned the life of the swan, the one who shot it or the one who healed it. So long story short, Devadatta had shown himself to be a person who lacked compassion from an early age. Later, having resigned himself to the fact that all the important people were becoming ordained as disciples of the Buddha, then he too jumped on the bandwagon and became a monk. But his own monastic attainments were not particularly spectacular. He was able to attain some of the lower absorptions, which gave him the ability to do some fairly elementary miracles. So there are miracles in quotation marks, and there are miracles. The sort of miracles in which Buddhists are usually interested are those performed by those who are fully enlightened. Such miracles tend to be of the type that can help a person to teach Buddhism better. For example, if a monk is teaching meditation to someone and they can discern what's on their students' minds, then they will be able to teach meditation more effectively. But the sort of mental powers which Devadatta had managed to gain as a result of his practice were more like a sort of parlor trick, whereby he could change his appearance if he wanted to. Oh yes, and I nearly forgot, one last person in the sutta is Prince Udayabhatta, who was King Ajatasattu's newborn son. The reason this sutta was given was because Devadatta, despite being a monk, had done something which threatened the reputation of monks more widely. What he had done when he found out that he couldn't gain much influence in the monastic community by honest means, even though he was related to the Buddha, was to try to find dishonest ways to elevate his status. The Vinaya tells us that he started out by suggesting that the Buddha hand over the leadership of the monastic community to him. Instead of being motivated by the usual benefits of the monkhood, he craved influence and status. So basically, he had missed the point about the reason for becoming a monk. At one stage, he resorted to more violent assassination attempts, one of which involved trying to crush the Buddha under a falling boulder. But that is a story for another day. Needless to say, Devadatta didn't meet with success. Another thing which he tried was to undermine the Buddha's political power base. Because the Buddha was spiritual advisor to several kings, and one of these was King Bimbisara, Devadatta thought that if he could depose that king, his own star would rise. So he thought the way he might do that would be to incite Prince Ajatasattu to displace his father, King Bimbisara, prematurely from the throne. It turned out that Prince Ajatasattu had strong faith in Devadatta personally, because Devadatta had previously performed a miracle in front of him in order to appear somehow more powerful or convincing. And the details are not found directly in this sutta, but are pieced together from the Vinaya, the Digha Nikaya commentary known as the Sumangala Vilasini, the Dhammapada commentary, Anguttara Nikaya, and various Jatakas. These commentaries relate that Devadatta shape-shifted himself into the hallucination of a young child wearing a girdle of snakes in Ajatasattu's lap, before turning back again into his normal appearance. Ajatasattu was awestruck, and not really knowing the difference between miracles, in quotation marks, and miracles, thought that this was a sign that Devadatta must be all-knowing, and anything which he said must also be true. So when Devadatta started to incite him to replace his father on the throne, he followed all the advice he was given. When his father, King Bimbisara, found out about his son's plans, he said, "Look, son, if you want to ascend to the throne, just help yourself. I won't stand in your way. I'm fed up with worldly responsibilities anyway." Bimbisara was not attached to the throne because he had previously attained Srimati, which meant that he had attained one of the lower stages of enlightenment. He was no longer attached to worldly things, but was simply living out his final years as king. Nonetheless, Devadatta sowed further seeds of dissension with Ajatasattu. He claimed that if Bimbisara were still around, those loyal to him would still make problems for Ajatasattu even though he became king. The best thing to do would be to lock Bimbisara up, not let him see the light of day anymore. In Buddhism, it's understood that any bad actions against one's parents are particularly heinous, because of the great debt of gratitude we have towards our parents. So, if you do something bad to your parents, then it's particularly heavy karma. Ajatasattu imprisoned his father, but since his father seemed to be thriving in solitude with lots of chance to meditate, then again Ajatasattu became impatient and asked Devadatta, "What should I do about this?" Devadatta replied, "Well, why don't you just stop sending him food?" So Ajatasattu let his father starve in his cell. Once Queen Videha found out about this, she started to smuggle food to the old king. When Ajatasattu forced his mother to visit the king empty-handed, she smothered her body in ghee or something like that before visits, so that her husband could lick sustenance from her person during visits. Subsequently, Ajatasattu withdrew all visitation rights. Consequently, Bimbisara spent his time pacing his cell in walking meditation, and even without food he could still sustain himself on the joy arising from his meditation. Still, Ajasattu was not content, and he took a razor blade to the soles of his father's feet and rubbed salt into the cuts, so it was too painful for his father to walk anymore. As a result of having to endure extreme pain, before long King Bimbisara passed away, basically dying because of the actions of his own son. In legal parlance, such a crime would be called parricide, and Buddhists regard this as one of the forms of heavy sin, the equivalent to mortal sin, where even if you have good karma in your past, that good karma will be blocked from helping you until that heavy karma has worn off. So basically, it's destining the perpetrator to a very low level of hell realms, no matter how much good they do in penance. A few days later, King Ajasattu became father to his first child, Udayipatha. When that child was born, Ajasattu experienced a profound sense of love, for perhaps the first time in his life. It suddenly occurred to him that his late father must once have been proud of him in just the same way. Suddenly he felt pangs of conscience about what he'd done to his father. From that time onwards, he consequently could not sleep at night. From a person who had previously shown very little interest in spiritual matters, now Ajasattu became obsessed with trying to find spiritual answers to this question of conscience, especially to the question of why Devadatta, who should have been an example of a good and well-practicing monk from a reliable religious order, could incite a follower to commit such a terrible misdeed. He started to wonder whether all monks in his kingdom were secretly doing the same, walking around convincing people they ought to be killing their parents. Because if this was the case, Buddhism should definitely be considered a threat to national security. He had doubts in his mind about whether religion was part of the solution to social unrest or part of the problem. In India, in the olden days, there was a tradition that when it came to the full moon night, because it was cooler at night than during the day, but bright enough for people to carry on their activities, people would visit a favorite temple and listen to spiritual teachings, sometimes until dawn. So like the others, each full moon day, King Ajasattu would ask his courtiers for suggestions about where he should go to listen to a spiritual teaching that night. Because Ajasattu's palace had courtiers subscribing to various different religious traditions, they would of course recommend their own teacher and say, "Come along and listen to this teacher. Let's see what he has to say about the problems on your Majesty's mind." And there were 6 different so-called heretical teachers, in Sanskrit, Heretics, who were contemporary to the Buddha, all of whom had slightly different angles on spiritual philosophy and practice, were mentioned from paragraphs 2 through 7 of the manuscript. At the time of the sutta, Ajasattu had already visited all 6 of them without receiving a satisfactory answer to his questions. However, being a polite person, he never said anything bad about the teachings he'd received. But when invited to go for a repeat visit, he simply said he didn't want to go again. Whenever Ajasattu visited a teacher, he would ask questions about the doubts on his mind. One about his guilt, like, would causing your father to die be an ethical problem in your tradition? And one to clarify Devadatta's bad behavior concerning the goal of the monastic life. Because all the spiritual teachers who received King Ajasattu wanted to obtain royal patronage, they unanimously tried to make light of the fact that he killed his own father. So the first teacher Ajasattu visited was called Pūraṇa Kassapa, who was an amoralist who subscribed to a set of teachings called Akiriya Ditti or Akiriya Vata, which means the view that your actions have no consequences, that there is no reward or punishment for either good or bad deeds. So this would be a very convenient view for Ajasattu to follow, because if you could kill your father and it didn't have any karmic consequences, then that would be great. You could just make a fresh start, because there would be no retribution for your actions. But unfortunately for the second question on the point of being a monk, Pūraṇa Kassapa couldn't come up with a good answer. So the following month, Ajasattu went to visit a different teacher, an Ajivaka called Makkhali Gosāla. His name Makkhali literally meant the one who carries a bamboo staff, while his surname Gosāla meant born in a cowshed. Although this name may have been concocted by rival Buddhist or Jain partisans, wishing to show him in an unfavorable light. The philosophies to which Makkhali Gosāla subscribed were called non-causality, in Pali Ahetuka Ditti, and fatalism or determinism in Pali called Niyati Vata. So he taught Ajatasattu that things happen for no reason, that if karmic consequences come to you, then it's just random and has nothing to do with your actions. So basically, we are powerless and any suffering we experience is predestined. Again, this would be a very convenient philosophy for someone who might be on the receiving end of the karma of killing their own father. But unfortunately, Makkhali Gosāla couldn't give Ajatasattu a good answer to the question about the point of being a monk. So the subsequent month, Ajatasattu visited a third teacher from the Charvaka or Lokayata school called Ajita Kesakambala, sometimes spelled Ajita Kesakambali, which means the unconquerable one of the hairy blanket, because he went about dressed in a blanket woven from human hair, and was very argumentative by nature. Ajita preached two philosophies, one of nihilism, which in Pali is called Natika Ditti, and one of hedonistic materialism, which in Pali is called Ucceta Ditti or Ucceta Vata, both of which added up to both an atheistic worldview and an attitude of eat, drink, and be merry. The nihilistic views meant that they believed that nothing in this world has any existence beyond its material atoms. For example, if you were to stab someone, then since that person is just made up of a collection of atoms, the blade simply pierces between the atoms, which have no intrinsic feelings anyway. So there's no karmic consequences. And when you die, there's no spiritual component to outlive the body. So again, this is a very convenient philosophy if you have your father's blood on your hands. But unfortunately, Ajita Kesakambala couldn't give Ajatasattu a very good answer to the question about the point of being a monk. So in the fourth month, Ajatasattu went to visit an atomist teacher called Pakudha Kaccāyana. This teacher preached the philosophy of eternalism, which in Pali is known as Sassata Ditti or Sassata Vata. That there are 7 eternal elements: earth, water, fire, air, happiness, pain, and soul. And these elements do not interact with one another. It means that however things are now, then they're going to stay that way. If you're king now, it doesn't matter if you do good or bad, because you're going to be king forever. But as reassuring as Pakudha Kaccāyana's message was for Ajatasattu, unfortunately he couldn't give a good answer to the question about the point of being a monk. So in the subsequent month, Ajatasattu went to visit a proponent of the Ajñāna school, which preached skepticism or agnosticism, which in Pali is known as Amaravikepa Ditti or Amaravikepa Vata. The teacher's name was Sañjaya Belaṭṭhiputta, and his practice would be to suspend judgment on every issue and evade giving an opinion. This practice, also known as dialectical existentialism, or in Pali Nigaṇṭha Vata, supposedly rejects the poles of this is and this is not, in aid of supporting an atmosphere of religious tolerance. However, Buddhists deemed this behavior to be endless equivocation, or a philosophy of eel-wrigglers. Sañjaya's views would change according to the season and the listener. He avoided giving any firm answers. If you asked him about apples, he would tell you about pears. If you asked about mangoes, he'd tell you about bananas. So obviously, Sañjaya Belaṭṭhiputta couldn't give Ajatasattu a good answer to the question about the point of being a monk. So in the 6th month, Ajatasattu went to see a teacher called Nigaṇṭha Nāṭaputta, also known as Mahavira or Vardhamana. He is the 24th preacher of the only tradition which remains extant in the present day, which is the Jain tradition. Nigaṇṭha Nāṭaputta advocated the practice of self-mortification, or what is known in Pali as Attakila Matanuyoga. Some of you may be familiar with the way the Buddha practiced for 6 years before he came to the time when he sat under the Bodhi tree and became enlightened. You'll remember that the Buddha underwent the trials of self-mortification, sometimes starving himself, sometimes holding his breath until it was extremely painful, sometimes pressing his tongue against his palate for long periods of time. In other words, trying to subdue his physical well-being to discover spiritual well-being. The sort of thing where you hear about people sleeping on beds of nails. In Jain tradition, such practices would be advocated as restraint, or in Sanskrit, bahya tapas. to cleanse the practitioner of all evil. Like all the others, unfortunately, Nigaṇṭha Nāṭaputta couldn't give Ajita a good answer to the question about the point of being a monk. So in the manuscript itself, we catch up with events in the 7th month on the eve of the full moon night, when Ajita was asking his courtiers again, where should I go to hear some sensible spiritual teachings? We see in paragraph 8 that one of the Buddhists in his court, the royal physician called Jivaka Komarapacha, in the absence of anyone else's suggestions, recommended that the king go see the Buddha. In fact, this was an invitation which Ajita had been hoping for because he wanted to hear justification from the Buddha's own lips about the misbehavior of one of his own monks. So that night in procession, since King Ajita was paranoid about being assassinated by those closest to him, he disguised a whole lot of courtesans as bodyguards and went in procession to where the Buddha was in residence at Ambavana temple close by, surrounded on all sides by those female bodyguards. So you can see how paranoid he'd become. He couldn't sleep at night, and he was constantly afraid of being murdered by others because of his own guilty actions. So when he arrived in the presence of the Buddha, he asked the usual question about the point of being a monk, and the Buddha was able to give a very clear answer, which started with the most basic benefits of ordination and ending up with the most advanced ones. In the manuscript, we'll skip over paragraphs 16 through 33, which have the king repeating to the Buddha what the other 6 teachers had replied to the same question. So starting with the most basic or elementary fruits of true monkhood, the Buddha taught that the first advantage of being a monk is that if you are a monk, you no longer need to earn a salary. He asked Ajita to suppose one of his slaves had run away and become a monk. Buddha asked Ajita whether he would hunt them down as a runaway or whether he would allow them to continue as a monk. The king said, of course, if someone was so determined to become a monk, he would congratulate them and let them continue in the monkhood. Even so, said the Buddha, is the very first benefit of being a monk that you are released from your former worldly commitment to earn a living. But still, everyone is happy with your choice. Even if you come from a powerless social background or from an untouchable caste, but if you become a monk, then everyone looks up to you, including the king. The second basic benefit described by the Buddha is that instead of having to pay taxes, tithes, or tributes to the king or the IRS, regular people, including the king, will be quite happy to support an ordained person with free gifts of robes, food, lodging, and medicine. So although these might not be the main motivations for people becoming monks, but they certainly make life easier for those who commit to ordination. These are the first 2 fruits of the monkhood on an elementary level, with the benefits visible in the here and now. So before we continue with the rest of the entry-level fruits of true monkhood, this is probably a good juncture for us to take a break halfway and settle ourselves for 20 minutes of meditation, which today is our recent shorter re-recording of the track entitled Homecoming for the Mind. If at this time you would like to find a comfortable sitting position for yourself as you listen to my guidance. If you'd like to start by adjusting into a comfortable sitting position for yourself, whether you're sitting on a chair or on a meditation mat on the floor, just set aside a little bit of time to make sure your body is adjusted to be as comfortable as possible. So try to keep your back fairly straight. Adjust your posture so that you're in a position by which you feel you could sit for a long, long time without needing to move around too much. So whatever posture you choose, you can rest your right hand over your left hand, the index finger of the right hand touching gently against the thumb of the left hand, with your hands resting palm upwards on your lap. We join our hands together in this way because if the index finger slips away from the thumb, it will give us advance warning of napping on the job. And we breathe deeply to ourselves. We allow ourselves to feel the breath softly making its way through our nostrils, through our airways, to the space within our belly. Breathing deeply to ourselves, we may feel the air filling our lungs slowly, expanding our chest, leveling our shoulders. From there we exhale slowly and gently, and as we breathe out, we may feel that our entire body is becoming settled, relaxed, and content. And we may regard meditation as the opportunity for our mind to make its way back to its true home, to the place where it belongs, the source and effect of our own inner peace. So we close our eyes as gently as possible, in the same way we'd close our eyes to go to sleep. The way we close our eyes should be in such a way that we don't close our eyes too tightly, with no pressure on our eyelids, never squeezing our eyes shut. In effect, we allow our eyelids just to droop, and this is the very first step on the journey of homecoming for the mind. From there, we bring our attention back to become aware of the sensations within our body, simply by observing our sitting posture, taking a little bit of time to adjust it to perfection, just in case any part of us is feeling blocked, tense, or tight. We continue to adjust our body until our circulation is unimpeded from top to toe. And once we find ourselves in a relaxed sitting posture, we can relax further by releasing tension in every single muscle of our body. And to this end, we scan down through the whole of our body, starting at the top of our head. So we bring our attention back to relax it there, moving our attention down to relax our forehead, down to our eyes, nose, through both of our cheeks, all the way down to our chin, feeling the muscles of our entire face have become relaxed. We allow that tide of relaxation to move down through the back of our head and into our neck. We allow the relaxation to spread down through both shoulders, along both arms, to our hands, until we feel any tension dissipated from our fingertips. We continue on down by turning our attention to relax our chest. We allow the stream of relaxation to move down through our abdomen, through our legs, all the way down to the tips of our toes, until we feel satisfied that our entire body feels as relaxed as it can be, with every muscle loosened up completely and feeling at ease. We'll be able to tell when our body is truly comfortable because it'll feel spacious on the inside. It'll feel as if the boundaries of our body have gradually disappeared and everything seems to become alive, spacious, and refreshed. And in the same way our body needs to become relaxed for meditation, we also need to free the mind of any worries, frustration, irritation, or any of the problems that we might be keeping suppressed. By shedding all of them, unburdening our mind, and letting go of whatever negativity may still be lurking in our mind, we allow ourselves to become free of all of it completely, because the real origin of freedom in the mind is unburdening ourselves as far as possible from any residual negativity. It's almost like spring cleaning our mind one step at a time. And as the negativity disappears little by little, there will be increasingly a space within the mind for peace, purity, happiness, and wisdom to arise. So for the moment, we let ourselves become as free as possible from any potential disturbance, letting it go completely as a second step in the mind's homecoming on its journey toward inner peace. We might conjure up in the mind a feeling that we are filling up every single cell of our body with a feeling of joy, serenity, and happiness, until that feeling seems to pervade every last cell of our body. At the same time, we empty our mind of all thoughts, engaging instead with our feelings, our sensations, and our awareness. Then we gently gather together all our awareness, sensation, or consciousness in an area somewhere around the center of our abdomen, in keeping with our intention to engage with that sense of comfort. And if we ever lose touch with that sense of comfort, we can gently make an adjustment at any time to return ourselves to the best state of relaxation that we can manage. Again, regarding this as a homecoming for the mind, and you may imagine that you're sitting alone high on a mountain with an uninterrupted view to the horizon. Although you're sitting alone, but you don't feel lonely. Alone but content, on top of a mountain, free from any interference, completely carefree, perhaps with a gentle breeze blowing right through your body, to the extent that your body feels light in weight, soft, almost as if it's floating weightlessly, melting away into the atmosphere around you, until the sense of relaxation from the inside seems to be continuous, with the worry-free surroundings that extend all the way to the horizon. And you can allow yourself to be in the very middle of that space in which there's no disturbance, no intrusion, just our private haven of peace, where we can be entirely ourselves. And in essence, this is a space in which we can continue to free our mind of any residual negativity, feeling that we're becoming one with nature around us. And the more we can let go, the lighter and more spacious our own mind will become, until we can feel the center of that space within ourselves as the true home of the mind. So we bring the mind back home by gathering our attention and letting it gently rest in our center space within the body. The center space for the time being is any place inside us that feels tender and comfortable. We can place the attention there as gently as we can. Once our mind finds its way to where it needs to be, there will be an automatic arising of joyfulness and contentment in the mind. It doesn't require anything more. It is replete in and of itself. Our internal sensations will be ones of satisfaction. And all we need to do is maintain our awareness of that comfort. It's the sense of inner peace, which gradually emanates from within and continues to evolve as our own mind embraces our sense of consciousness with a light and gentle feeling that this is where the mind truly belongs. This is where true peace and purity can arise. And our job as a meditator is simply to maintain our mind, our awareness, at this point allowing our true nature to become full of peace and positivity. The feeling it gives us will be one of being unblemished and pristine, of clarity and purity. And all we need to do is maintain our awareness within this center space, letting it merge with that inner space. But if you feel that you need some sort of anchor for the mind, you might like to slowly visualize some sort of bright inner image, perhaps something as light as a bubble within yourself, a bubble that is crystal clear, floating free and weightlessly at the center of yourself. And you might imagine that a similar such bubble settles at the center of your body, delicate and fragile. All we need to do is maintain that picture of the bubble inside ourselves with the gentlest possible attention. We might imagine the bubble remains motionless or perhaps shimmering at the center of our abdomen, soft, delicate, gentle. We may discover that the bubble has its own illumination from the inside, or that it becomes gradually brighter, perhaps even as bright as the sun in the morning or at midday, but with a white light, a brightness that is cool and soothing, perhaps more similar to the light of the full moon at night. And it's a brightness that comes with a sense of peace, a feeling of ease, with a sense of illumination from the inside, from the center of ourselves. And all we need to do is maintain our awareness, the feeling and sensation at the center of that inner bubble, just slightly touching that feeling within the bubble of our awareness, while keeping our mind calm, still, relaxed, keeping the mind focused in stillness softly and gently. The mind should wander or get tangled up in thought. We don't need to try to stop ourselves from thinking. We just slowly guide our feeling, the focus of our attention back to the bubble again, always softly and gently, however many times it takes for the mind to start to stay centered, almost by second nature. And at this point in our meditation, all the thoughts and distractions will seem further away, as if in the distance. And all we have to do is simply observe the true nature of peace and tranquility, a sense of the depthening of the mind, Let this awareness so still, so soft, so gentle. At this point, all we need to do is observe. But for now, we continue to meditate for the last few moments of our practice, for a few more moments in silence. Sabba Buddhanupavena, Sabba Dhammanupavena, Sabba Saṅghānupavena Sattha Soti Bhavantu Te. So if you'd like to come to the end of your meditation for today, you can gradually open your eyes again. If you feel at all uncomfortable, then slowly try changing to a more comfortable position before gradually finishing your practice. So to return gently to our subject matter of the Sāmaññaphala Sutta for today, we continue by looking at the virtues in our elementary level of fruits of true monkhood that bring a monk to purity. In the suttas generally, there is a whole patchwork of overlapping advice for monks. Some in the Majjhima Nikāya's Gānika Moggallana Sutta, some in the Anguttara Nikaya's Appanapatipatthā, and 5 qualities of a newly ordained monk, and some in the Visuddhimagga's 4 items of Parisuddhisila. Here in the Sāmaññaphala Sutta, we have one of the most complete examples of the sequence of training in the elementary section, before meditational attainments start to arise. And perhaps to explain why Devadatta had not managed to achieve proper monkhood, instead of talking about the fruits of monkhood per se, the Buddha discusses the virtues that bring a monk to purity. So an overview of this training includes ordaining with a clear aim in mind, restraint according to the monastic code of conduct, pure livelihood, being endowed with self-discipline, restraint of the senses, being mindful and self-possessed, and finally contentment. So the first virtue that brings a monk to purity is that they should ordain with a clear aim in mind. Paragraph 41 tells us what a monk should be trying to achieve by becoming a monk. So this should include faith in the teaching of the Buddha, seeing the danger of the household life as attracting defilements, the wish to use the monkhood to pursue the Brahmafaring rather than ordaining on the rebound from heartbreak or because they cannot think of a better career choice. Monks generally wish to set the conditions by which it's easier for them to lead an upstanding life, purified and polished like a conch shell. Because as a layperson, there are many distractions compromising an ethical lifestyle. Spending time as a monk allows for a much greater opportunity for self-cultivation and training. So this is again a great benefit of becoming a monk, that monks have a clear aim in mind. Then we come to the next virtue that brings a monk to purity, which is practicing restraint according to the monastic code of conduct. Monks already get to keep 227 Patimokkha rules as their bare minimum of prohibitions derived from the Vinaya. However, in the Suttanta, there are many additional places where monks are given guidance as to what they should be doing. So where advice to monks in the Vinaya is like the letter of the law, the advice to monks in the Suttas is more like the spirit of monastic law. So the main thrust of this part of the teaching is that apart from keeping the rules, monks should also need to be careful about how they conduct themselves, which may concern the sort of image you present to other people, what might be known as optics in the present day, because they are the representatives of Buddhism as a whole. So although it's not in the monastic rules, there do exist grey areas of behavior with which Devadatta got himself involved. The way following the monastic rules is structured according to the Sāmaññaphala Sutta is to include three things: conduct, haunts, and seeing danger in small things, each of which I'll describe in turn. Those endowed with good conduct are those who show deference towards senior monks, robe themselves properly and smartly, take care of manners and gestures when moving about, keeping a downcast gaze, not looking left and right, avoiding childish mannerisms, demanding little, being steadfast, patient, and speaking only with restraint and compassion. The aspects of monastic conduct referred to as haunts mean places the monks should or should not frequent. Some of the things that are off limits refer to actual places, but many more figuratively include behavioral habits and states of mind which monks should also not frequent. Some of the haunts are not literal and are attitudes of mind to be avoided, such as inappropriate conversational topics, inappropriate curiosity, and non-mindfulness. However, the actual places mentioned specifically as out of bounds for monks, where monks should not frequent, are road-like districts, liquor stores, as well as the accommodation of widows, mature women, nuns, and ladyboys. It would only be appropriate for a monk to visit any of these places to perform a funeral for someone who had died there. To give another example of the logic, it may not be against the monk's patimokkha rules to go to the movie theatre, because in the time of the Buddha there were no movie theatres. The regular people who saw a monk in the movie theatre might think, oh, is this what monks do in their spare time? Or maybe, is this what monks spend all their time doing? So it's not a good look for monks. If monks are spotted in inappropriate places, those who had faith in Buddhism will have their faith diminished. And for those who had no faith, then seeing a monk in a movie theatre will only confirm their skepticism. The final aspect of monastic conduct is referred to as seeing danger even in small things. This means avoiding doing risky things, and if one happens to do them unintentionally, resolving never to do them again. For example, mending a hole in one's robe before it develops into a serious tear. So the next training in virtue for monks to reach purity is that they should support themselves only by pure livelihood. Just as lay people need to support themselves only by right livelihood, earning their living without cheating or causing harm to others, monks too need to be careful that the way they procure their livelihood is pure, because monks still require some sort of income in terms of food, shelter, clothing, and medicine. But they should be obtained by monks behaving themselves in such a way that people would want to give these basic requisites to them, even without having to be asked. So the only real form of pure livelihood for a monk is to go around with an alms bowl first thing in the morning. It's not begging for food, but it's providing the opportunity to give to those who regard the monks as worthy recipients of their donations. Where it oversteps the mark and becomes a sort of racketeering is where donations are solicited or begged for, or where monks are not contented to go an alms round, but instead have an agreement with a store to stand in the entrance, so that the monk entices customers into the store and the monk gets produce from the store, which they can later get a cash refund for. Also, dropping hints is not correct for monks either. For example, seeing someone sitting down to a meal and saying something like, oh, you'll probably never be able to manage to finish all that food. It's not in the monastic rules, but avoiding this sort of behavior is part of the culture of what it means to be a good monk. The next training for the purity of a monk is endowment with self-discipline, or in Pali, sila, which is shown in the manuscript from paragraphs 43 through 62, and refers to 3 different levels of morality, the short, middle, and large sections. For these 3 sections of morality, I have had to add them back in again from the Brahmajala Sutta because they were omitted and just footnoted in this English translation, which is yet another layer of complexity for those wishing to study Buddhism in English. The English translation here assumes that the 3 sections of morality are only distinguished by length, but in fact you can say that they become successively more detailed and hence offer a pathway of progress in monastic self-discipline. So for the short section on morality, which is the translation here for the Pali term Jula Sila, there are 26 items. Paragraph 43 shows first 13 items which are very similar to the novice's 10 precepts. Then come some things which monks should think twice about before accepting them as gifts. So slaves, livestock. If someone wants to give you a live elephant, should you accept it out of compassion to support their faith, or maybe you should ask them who's going to feed it once you've taken delivery. The last few items entail abstaining from things which are not pure livelihood, which are things like running errands for lay people, buying and selling, various other scams, as well as more serious criminal deeds. For the middle section of morality, which is the translation from the Pali term Majjhima Sila, paragraph 46 tells us that there are 10 items. Here, the Buddha focuses on more subtle trainings like avoiding damaging the environment, hoarding food, watching shows, and various sorts of entertainment, indulging in luxury furnishings and fancy beauty products, getting mixed up with soldiers and military stratagems, or engaging in unskillful topics of conversation. In case you're wondering, the trouble with monks getting involved with the military is that people will get killed one way or another because of your interventions. Furthermore, if you take sides, then you will be seen as partisan and be considered a threat by that army's enemies. Really, monks should position themselves as truly neutral parties, where the only good result in a battle is if no one gets hurt. So even though you may be a monk from a particular country and the king of that country is going to war with a neighbor, but as a monk it's not appropriate for you to take sides. So as a monk you need to be careful about the implications of your actions. Let's say a Buddhist army chaplain, yes, such a thing does exist, although with a green uniform is not usually an ordained monk for obvious reasons. Supposing they're invited to give encouragement to soldiers on the battlefield, should this be considered off limits? Supposing the chaplain is invited to a battlefield because the soldiers are afraid of death. They may be killed at any moment. It would be appropriate to go as a monk if you can communicate to them how precarious life is at the best of times. Maybe asking the soldiers, are you ready to die yet? If not, have you thought about all the good things that you've done in your life yet? It would not be the remit of a monk to cheer on the troops, to inflict the maximum of casualties, and once a monk has done his duty, he should quickly remove himself. It may be the case that you want to minister in the same way to the troops on the opposing army as well, since a monk is teaching on the universal message of the nature of life, rather than encouraging war. This is why in the Patimokkha rules there is a prescription that monks are allowed to enter a battle zone, but for no longer than 3 days, so they're not perceived to be having a vested interest. The situation becomes even more delicate if the belligerents belong to a non-Buddhist religion. Just because a person is not Buddhist doesn't mean that they don't deserve a monk's compassion. So for the large section on morality, which is a translation from the Pali term Mahasila, paragraph 56 tells us that there are 7 items. Here the Buddha focuses on still more subtle trainings, such as not being involved in things like superstitions, astrology, blessing weapons. For example, may your sword be a lucky sword so that it is lethal to all it strikes. Astrology, calculating auspicious dates for marriages, divorces, or manufacturing medicines. So when monks have endowed themselves with self-discipline, which goes beyond merely upholding the 227 rules of the Patimokkha, the Buddha prescribed in paragraph 64 that they should be restrained in the use of the senses. It is more common to hear encouragement, come to your senses, but in Buddhism we are told to withdraw from our external senses. So not to grasp at the stimuli that come to us via the eyes, ears, nose, taste buds, or sense of touch, either in whole or in part. Often the essential stimuli can be like baited hooks, which have been cast into the water. Like a fish, we can get hooked very easily. In fact, no one forces fish to bite. It's up to the fish whether they bite or not. But if the hook is tempting enough, then the fish can hardly resist. Once they take a bite, they can't get free of the hook anymore. With the senses, it's much the same. We have a total of 6 senses, 5 directed towards the outside, and the 6th, which is our mental faculty. To develop the mental faculty, we must withdraw from the 5 external senses. So when we're talking about restraining the senses, it means reducing the attachments we have for the sensual. And for Buddhist monks, this is particularly important, and it justifies monks leading frugal lives and avoiding indulgence in the external senses to get more chance to learn about the mind. So having mastered sense restraint, the Buddha advocated that monks should upgrade themselves further by developing mindfulness and self-possession. In Pali, Sati Sampajanya Samanakato. So following the explanation in paragraph 65, our sire is a monk accomplished in mindfulness and clear awareness. Here a monk acts with clear awareness in going forth and back, in looking ahead or behind him, in bending and stretching, in wearing his outer and inner robe, in carrying his bowl, in eating, drinking, chewing and swallowing, in evacuating and urinating, in walking, standing, sitting, lying down, in waking, in speaking, and in keeping silent. He acts with clear awareness. In this way, a monk is accomplished in mindfulness and clear awareness. In practicality, the sort of issues covered by mindfulness is learning moderation in the use of the 4 requisites. For example, recognizing moderation in eating. It would also refer to keeping the mind at the center of the body 24 hours a day, even in between the meditation sessions and while doing other tasks. As for self-possession, it would refer to the development of continuous awareness, especially awareness of what is of benefit, what is appropriate, awareness of the nature of implicit happiness, and protecting oneself against naivety. So having mastered mindfulness and self-possession, the Buddha advocated that monks should go further by developing contentment, in Pali Santutto. This doesn't mean contentment with shoddiness. Instead, contentment means that you are not hankering after more than what you already have or what you receive. So you feel settled in your mind no matter what happens to you. Monastic training centers on this feeling of contentment, unlike the rat race where the prevailing mindset is to be a go-getter, never content with what you have, but to strive for something more, to outdo the neighbors. Because meditators or monks is the other way around. As the Buddha says in paragraph 66, with alms to satisfy his stomach, and having accepted sufficient, he goes on his way, just as a bird with wings flies hither and thither, burdened by nothing but his wings, so that he is satisfied. This quality of contentment is particularly important when monks come to the next stage of practice, which requires solitude in order to focus on the inward practice, which brings them to the intermediate fruits of monkhood. So far, we didn't actually get down to the practice of meditation yet. Everything we mentioned has been prerequisites, which facilitate successful meditation. If a monk can uphold good conduct by keeping the monastic rules, having pure livelihood, self-discipline on all 3 levels, restraint of the senses, mindfulness, self-possession, and contentment, their mind will yield results from cultivation when they eventually seek out solitude for meditation. According to the instructions at paragraph 67, a monk finds a solitary lodging at the root of a forest tree, in a mountain cave or gorge, a charnel ground, a jungle thicket, or in the open air on a heap of straw. Then, having eaten, after his return from the alms round, he sits down cross-legged, holding his body erect, and concentrates on keeping mindfulness established before him. At this point, the monk overcomes the 5 hindrances, which you will already have heard me describe in other lectures, namely sense desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, absent-mindedness and doubt. From paragraph 68 through 75, we have descriptions not only of the 5 hindrances, but metaphors for the feeling of relief experienced by the practitioner when overcoming each of them in their meditation. To save time, I won't go into detail of these today, but I'll proceed instead to the description of how, when you start to move to the higher fruits of monkhood, the practitioner can attain the 4 absorptions, or 4 what's known in Pali as jhana, where the mind enters upon increasingly subtle states. Usually I describe the 4 jhanas in terms of inner bodies, but today for a change I'll draw your attention to the metaphors for how it feels to be in each of the jhanas, as they are described in detail in the manuscript of the Sāmaññaphala Sutta. So for the first jhana, the sutta uses the simile of bath powder. Paragraphs 75 and 76 tell us that the gladness arises within the meditator, detached from sense desires, detached from unwholesome states. They enter and remain in the first jhana, where delight and joy so suffuses, drenches, fills, and irradiates their body that there is no spot in their entire body that is untouched by this delight and joy born of detachment. Just as a skilled bathman or his assistant, kneading the soap powder which has been sprinkled with water, forms from it in a metal dish a soft lump, so that the ball of soap powder becomes one oleaginous mass, bound with oil, so that nothing escapes. Moving on to the second jhana, the sutta uses the simile of the lake with cool water. Paragraphs 77 and 78 tell us that delight and joy so suffuse the body that no spot remains untouched, just as a lake, fed by a spring with no inflow from east, west, north, or south, but the water welling up from below, mingling with cool water, would suffuse, fill, and irradiate that cool water, so that no part of the pool was left untouched by it. Even so is the meditator's body suffused with delight and joy, born of concentration, so that no spot remains untouched. Moving on to the third jhana, the sutta uses the simile of the underwater lotus. Paragraphs 79 and 80 tell us joy devoid of delight so suffuses the body that no spot remains untouched. Just as if in a pond of blue, red, or white lotuses, in which the flowers, born in the water, grown in the water, not growing out of the water, are fed from the water's depths, those blue, red, or white lotuses would be suffused with the cool water. Even so, joy, devoid of delight, suffuses the meditator's body, leaving no spot untouched. Finally, for the fourth jhana, the sutta uses the simile of the pure white cloth. Paragraphs 81 and 82 tell us that the meditator enters the fourth jhana, which is beyond pleasure and pain, but is purified by equanimity and one-pointedness. The meditator's body is suffused with that mental purity and clarification, so that no part of the body is untouched by it. Just as if a person were to sit wrapped from head to foot in a white garment, so that no part of them was untouched by that garment, so his body is suffused with that mental purity and clarification. Finally, if you can master all four jhanas, you can attain enlightenment in terms of the paths and fruits of nirvana, touching upon increasingly transcendental states of mind. So once a monk reaches the point in their practice where they have completely destroyed the defilements of greed, hatred, and delusion in the mind, it is possible that, to a greater or lesser extent, the monk will be able to attain the higher fruits of monkhood, which are the same 8 supranormal knowledges I have already described in blessing number 38, namely insight knowledge, vipassana jnana, mental powers, manomayati, supernormal powers, itipita, supranormal audition, dipasota, reading the minds of others, cetopariyaya jnana, ability to recall one's own previous existences, pupe nivasanusati jnana, ability to recollect the previous existence of others, jatupapata jnana or dipacakku, and knowledge of an utter end to all defilements, or asavakaya jnana. As I mentioned at the start, there's miracles in quotation marks, and there are miracles. Some of the miracles worth their salt are things like being able to know what's going on in the mind of another person, be able to hear what's going on beyond what you can normally hear with the human ear, and so on. The sort of miracles Devadatta was able to perform were not considered a higher fruit of monkhood because they were not accompanied by an utter release from all defilements. So what was the outcome of the teaching? King Ajatasattu gained a much more profound understanding from what the Buddha taught than he had managed to obtain from speaking to the other 6 heretical teachers. More importantly, he realized that Devadatta had not been conducting himself in a way befitting a monk. This cleared up the doubts which Ajatasattu had previously had about what are all these monks doing in my kingdom. Obviously, Devadatta was a bad apple, an exception that proves the rule. Consequently, King Ajasatru was so impressed by the Buddha's teaching that we see in paragraph 99 that he vowed to give his support to the Buddha for the rest of his life. But a final interesting outcome that occurred that we see in paragraph 100 is that before Ajasatru returned to the palace, he confessed to the Buddha what he had done. He said, "I realize now what a terrible thing I've done, and I will not do this again." You might think that such a confession doesn't really count for much, but it does show something quite important, which is that he had made up his mind never again to slip back into that unwholesome mindset, that he would strive to become a better person moving forward. Indeed, for the remaining years of his life, Ajasatru became a major patron of Buddhism and supported the first council meeting to compile the Buddha's teachings once the Buddha himself had passed away. Once Ajasatru had gone back to the palace with his entourage, what we see at paragraph 102, the Buddha revealed to the other monks present that if King Ajasatru had not committed that crime of patricide, by the means of that sermon he would have attained stream entry, but unfortunately because of the weight of that heavy karma, then the benefits of that sermon could not help him. So in conclusion, this sutta tells us a lot about the characteristics of a good Buddhist monk, and the characteristics of monks not worthy of respect, since not all monks are worthy. The sutta describes not only the monastic training within the 227 rules of the Patimokkha, but also within the culture more peripheral to monasticism. We learn that if monks practice properly, there are many benefits which await them. But on a deeper level, the sutta shows that even a person who has done dire things in their life can turn their life around eventually, even if they may be plagued by guilt in the meantime. We also saw an example of how associating with fools, even monastic ones, can have serious afterlife retribution, while, on the contrary, associating with someone wise like the Buddha, who can properly point out the nature of life, gives the opportunity for a person to attain nirvana. So the sort of person who we associate with can have a very important influence on our future. We also learned that although confession is not a prominent part of Buddhist practice, public acts of contrition can be an important, skillful means of turning the corner on unwholesome episodes in one's life. The sutta also gives a clear explanation of the pathway by which human character qualities can be upgraded. For any Buddhist, such an upgrade involves understanding the proper nature of one's duties and fulfilling those duties purposefully. For monks, this sutta gives us the details of monastic duties, which entail self-training in the precepts, meditation, and wisdom. Lastly, the context of this sutta gives us an interesting insight into a certain period of history in India, where the rigid status quo of the caste system was starting to fall apart, opening up the forum to different alternative religious worldviews by which people could claim their spiritual mobility. The arising of the Buddha and the 6 heretical teachers could be seen as different forms of pushback against the former status quo of the Indian caste system. So this session I have introduced to you the Sāmaññaphala Sutta. So for my next live session online, which will fingers crossed be a week on Sunday morning, we'll move on to look at the Kukkura Jataka, which is a teaching about justice and leadership. For good measure, I'd like to remind viewers that you can email your questions about meditation or what you've heard in the lecture to the email address you can see spelled out in the slide, and I will do my best to answer these on my next session. In the meantime, try to avoid recklessness or complacency as we continue to deal with the knock-on health and economic effects of the pandemic. Maintain a positive mood, speak only positive words, forgive others, extend good wishes to others, and meditate daily. Hopefully, as a result of today's session, you will be better able to discern spiritual advice received from monks or model your own spiritual transformation on the stages of monastic training. So for today, this is me, Phra Nicholas Thanissaro, signing off for now. So long, folks, and stay safe.